Okay, thanks everyone. Welcome to tonight's event with Omar. I'm Bashir. So we'll be going for about an hour. We've got this evening, Omar. Is that right?
Yeah. So I should be able to finish it in about 35 to 40 minutes, and then we can have a conversation on whatever has been spoken about.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, for those of you that don't know me, then my name is Barry Cranford. I'm the founder of the LJC and one of the organisers of the London CTOs. So I'm not a CTO or a developer myself. I'm in fact a recruiter, or at least I run a tech recruitment company. I'm sure many of you will know, called RecWorks. So I'm not going to give it a big description tonight. I'm going to get out of Omar's way. So Omar Bashir is a principal consultant currently working with ThoughtWorks. He's got 25 years experience, largely as a software developer. And this is his presentation for you all on rethinking cloud migrations. So hope you have a great evening tonight, and please do leave some feedback for us. Omar, over to you.
Thank you very much, Barry. I'll share my screen. Let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, all good.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. And hi, everyone. As Barry mentioned, I'm a principal consultant at ThoughtWorks, previously about 13 years in financial technology and various other industries. So I've come across a few cloud migrations in the recent past, and I thought that I'd journal my experiences and share it with everybody else, and find out more from others as well after this conversation. So why cloud? I mean, that's a question that has largely been answered in several forums, but I thought that I'd go over it just one more time very quickly. So if you rewind back about 2 or 3 years, then you would find that cost used to be one of the major concerns that people would have, which would prompt them to move to clouds. But if you review the literature more recently, cost has gone down a few notches, and what has taken its place is largely increased agility. So people are looking at increased agility, being able to pivot. Transformation is a big thing right now for people, and being able to exploit opportunities, have a faster rate of innovation, and a reduced lead time to change is one of the big reasons why people are migrating to cloud or adopting cloud. In addition to that, that elasticity is a big plus point as well. Companies are looking at being able to find economical ways to expand their capacity or to reduce it based on demand and usage. And finally, a lot of people point out disaster recovery and business continuity as being key factors for them to move to cloud. And as you can say, opportunities for cost optimizations are a big factor, but not top of the list in any way. So there is a temptation to move to the cloud. Here I've picked up various trends that are there in various magazines and media. So people are talking about a large part of their tech spending in the next few years to be spent on the cloud. And we all know who the major players are. AWS and Azure are basically leading the trend over here, with the Azure giving AWS quite a bit of a run in the recent past few quarters. Google, Oracle, and IBM are trailing behind with a lot less share in the market. Large number of firms are looking at a multi-cloud strategy, whereby they are not just looking at one particular vendor. They are also not looking at just the public cloud, but they are also looking at the private cloud, because they have people have started realizing that not all workloads favor or sit very well on the public cloud. In addition to that, and because of that, you can see that about 41%, nearly 50% of the firms tend to rely on public cloud in some way, shape, or form. But it's not all that rosy. Cloud migrations are tough. Most organizations report cost overruns, time overruns. Nearly about 40% of people say that a cloud migration typically can take about 2 years or more. There is a trend, noticeable trend, on repatriation of certain applications back to on-premises from cloud. And one can argue that those applications that are being repatriated are ones that were not thought through properly. Their workload did not sit well on the cloud. So those analyses weren't done appropriately, and that's why those applications were repatriated. But that trend is that trend exists, and that is a matter of concern for cloud vendors as well. Now, 50% of the repatriated applications from the survey that I've quoted in this slide were because of performance issues, and a large number of them were also because of cost reasons. And the ones and the people repatriating their applications, the teams repatriating their applications, were unlikely to consider public cloud in the near future because they would consider this experience to be quite unfavorable for them. So the underlying message is that one has to rethink the approach by which they have to migrate their applications to the cloud. So if people have had teams have had successful experiences on deploying and building applications on premises, it does not mean that their approach, the on-prem approach, is going to work successfully on the cloud. And this is what we are going to discuss in the remaining few slides here. So the first thing that that comes to mind while thinking about cloud migration is to actually consider a portfolio audit. So basically looking at the workloads that need to be, or the workloads that exist within an organization, assessing those workloads, whether they are fit enough to be migrated to the cloud or not. So if you look at the diagram to the side, so the result of the audit are going to highlight applications that need to be retained on premises for a number of reasons. They could be performance critical applications, and the cloud may not be suitable for strict performance real-time guarantees. Then there are applications that need to be replaced on premises. They are also not fit for migration. And then there are applications that are being considered for retirement. So this portfolio audit is essential to reduce the scope of your cloud migration exercise, and is and needs to be done in a manner that it generates those insights about the applications and the workloads that need to be retained and not to be migrated onto the cloud, because that would lead to wasted time and effort and expense. Now, once you have highlighted applications that do need to be migrated to the cloud, then there are a number of migration strategies that one needs to choose from. And three of them are most commonly talked about are rehosting, which is also known as lifting and shifting; replatforming, which is basically using taking your application and putting it on the cloud infrastructure and being able to put it on a virtualized infrastructure and start using the cloud services; and then re-architecting, that essentially involves refactoring your applications so that they become cloud native applications. Now, the interesting thing is that these strategies are not mutually exclusive. So you can have a situation where you rehost, lift and shift an application, and then replatform or re-architect it, or you could rehost and or you could re-architect it on premises and then move it onto the cloud. So a little bit more detail on these strategies. So rehosting largely happens for legacy tightly coupled applications where the where re-architecting those applications is going to be costly, time consuming, and may cause major disruption to your business. So lifting and shifting those applications is the only economical way of moving them onto the cloud. But then there is a downside to it, that those applications may not be able to use all the benefits that cloud has to offer to them. Now, replatforming is feasible for applications where architectures can leverage virtualization and cloud facilities and services. Whereas in re-architecting, there are strong business and technical drivers to re-architecture those applications, thus making them cloud native. And re-architecture is essentially an approach, a sought after approach, because this offers the largest potential for agility, productivity, and economy on the cloud. Now, while agility seems to be one of the major factors on in firms adopting cloud or migrating to cloud, cost seems to catch up with it once the migration effort starts. And quite a lot of uncomfortable conversations on cloud cost tend to happen when the migration process starts taking a long time. Now, this is where it is important for technologists to actually play an active part in those conversations and talk about not just cost, but also on the margins that your migration exercise would generate. Now, strategies, migration strategies that help start generating revenue during the migration effort tend to give quite a lot of foundation to such conversations, where people can converse with the leadership on the margins that the migrated applications are generating, rather than just the cost the migration effort is incurring. And in addition to that, they also help maintain motivation for the team and continue the momentum for the migration effort. And the workloads that tend to maximize these operating margins are generally at the least risk of repatriation. So it is important that such conversations, the control of those conversations has to be taken from cost and to be turned around into margins. And that can only happen once the migration effort is such that incrementally we are able to generate revenue from cloud migrations. So coming back to strategies, it is an interesting it is an interesting point in which strategy to select when thinking about migration. So first of all, at the overarching all or none migration strategy should largely be discouraged, because the downside of such a migration strategy is none. So and most migration efforts that you find stalled tend to have their roots in an all or none migration strategy. One big issue with all or none migration strategies is that they imply feature parity. That means that all the features that exist on premises have to be taken onto the cloud. That increases migration time because a lot of unnecessary and redundant features are being taken. Cloud continues to remain a cost till that exercise is completed. So people cannot turn the conversation on money from cost to margins, and they cannot have that momentum, and the conversation starts focusing on the wrong things, which is cutting costs rather than enhancing the application and generating more revenue. Similarly, a singular migration approach is restrictive. So just considering rehosting or replatforming or re-architecting as a singular approach is generally counterproductive. Sometimes you will find that rehosting is an initial step, which can then be followed by replatforming or re-architecture. And then considering these strategies overall on an application or on a large application is again restrictive and counterproductive. You may have to look at it in a more granular level on an application. So some subsystems within an application can just simply be rehosted, whereas other subsystems can be re-architectured and then moved on to the cloud. So one of the approaches that, or two of the approaches that generally favor incremental modernization and migration efforts are thin slicing and triangulation. So if you are thinking about migrating your applications to the cloud, either by re-architecting them on premises and then migrating them, or rehosting them and then re-architecting them, these two approaches would give you significant flexibility and would allow you to start putting your features out into production much sooner than previously anticipated. So the thin slicing basically involves building complete features front to back, but incrementally. So you go feature by feature as you and as you progress, you complete your application. Strangulation, relatively similar approach. It involves incrementally migrating functionality from legacy to modern platform. So as you progress with the strangulation project, you take functionalities in bits and pieces from the legacy application and you move it onto the modern platform. But as you are going through any migration exercise, and even after your cloud migration exercise, and if you're trying to have a conversation on margins, then it is important to keep pushing down the bottom line. That is, keep an active eye on cost yourself and bringing it down before anybody else starts having that conversation with you. So the three approaches that are used for getting the cost down is to reduce the consumption, have a flexible implementation so that you can move your computation and data around within the cloud to reduce the cost, and having and leveraging cloud pricing schemes. So if you look at reducing consumption, so the simplest way of reducing consumption is to reduce your cloud footprint. And one of the best ways to reduce your cloud footprint is to actually have a conversation about reducing the redundant and unnecessary functionality that is sitting in your application. In addition to that, it is important to right-size resources. If you were using a certain resource of a certain capacity on premises, that does not necessarily mean that if you have to continue using that. If your application wasn't using that much capacity, you have to continue using that on the cloud. So even a lift and shift provides an opportunity to right-size your resources and reduce your costs over there. Now, the most interesting aspect of reducing consumption is to optimize execution. So have operating efficiencies within your cloud estate that allow you to do more with less. And by optimizing your execution, you would be able to reduce costs and will be able to perform more of your functionality with less cost. And finally, reduce idle time. So automating relentlessly, having a DevOps approach, we will be talking about it later, which would ensure that the idle time on your cloud estate is as less as possible. That could be during deployments or could be during recovery after failover. So coming to flexible implementation. So this is about building your functionality in such a way that it is not tightly coupled with the hosting mechanism that that your application is on. So building your services in such a way that your business functionality is effectively run anywhere. So depending on your traffic and call volumes, you may be able to migrate your business functionality dynamically from places like containerized services to fundamentally serverless. So if your call volumes drop, API call volumes drop, then Lambda may be a very useful place to put your business functionality. If they increase beyond a certain point, then putting them on a compute server may be more feasible. So this is something that this flexibility is something that can reduce costs quite significantly. And this can only be achieved by reducing infrastructure and platform leakages into your domain functionality. So building your applications, building your core domain functionality in as platform agnostic manner as possible. And finally, looking at leveraging cloud pricing schemes. Now, these pricing schemes can offer substantial saving, but they need to be used quite carefully. So because there in some pricing schemes, there is a risk of locking into a certain resource profile, which is uneconomical when the resource when the usage profile changes. So for example, this is a pricing scheme from Amazon for their EC2 instances. And we can see that there is a clear lock-in in these pricing schemes. Now, if I go and subscribe to one of these pricing schemes, I am actually locked in, and because that I won't be able to move my compute somewhere else if I want to, because of that. Also, be wary of pricing schemes that encourage higher usage. For example, pay less as you use more. Again, with Amazon, they have a similar pricing scheme on S3, where if you use more of S3, you pay less. But you may find that if you're not optimizing, if you're giving into that such pricing schemes, they may lead to an overall higher spend later on. So you have to be very careful in leveraging cloud pricing schemes, but they can offer some cost efficiencies. So looking at various objectives that would take you to that would encourage you to move to cloud, and looking at some of the key constraints that would make it challenging for you to remain on cloud, we have come up with some key migration principles. And these are adopting a DevOps mindset, focusing not just on performance, but on efficiency, building independent applications, and having a transformational approach to cloud migrations. So DevOps basically is creating an end-to-end efficiency, is about creating an end-to-end efficiency in your delivery pipeline, and ensuring that your application going from delivery right down into production and in operation is a seamless and an efficient mechanism. So a focus on the 4 key metrics, which are called the accelerate metrics, is critical in this regard. So by reducing your lead time and your mean time to recovery, increasing your deployment frequency, and reducing your change failure rate, you would be able to reduce any kind of idle time that exists anywhere inside your pipeline. And by reducing the idle time, you would be able to reduce not just the cloud cost, but the overall cost to your business. That means the developer time as well as opportunity costs in turning changes out into production. Then shifting left for testing gives you faster feedback, and it also reduces the usage of cloud resources. So you don't require as many test environments. And if you require those test environments, which you do, you don't require them for a large amount of time. And you could essentially relinquish those environments when they are not being used, and thus reducing your cost. And then finally, automated provisioning and teardown is essential here as well, is in fact more important than anything else. So if you are able to create your environments that you need for your development and for your testing as seamlessly and easily as possible, you would be able to, you would not be keen to hold on to them once you are not using them. And that is where a significant amount of cost savings come in. In addition to that, you can also automatically and aggressively reclaim unused resources. So if an environment is not being used beyond a certain amount of time, or its usage drops over a period of time, then it could be automatically reclaimed. And there is no harm done once it's reclaimed, because you can automatically provision it afterwards very easily and very conveniently. Now, this is a topic that is quite close to my heart, which is about efficiency and not just performance. So cloud has also been, many cloud vendors have also been promising performance. And performance, the promise of performance is practically misleading on a cloud. And they are promising performance basically on scalability. You can either vertically or horizontally scale your infrastructure to give your application the performance that they need. That is what the cloud vendors tend to sell. But it may be convenient because you can provision resources conveniently on cloud, but it will be very costly. So how do we go about getting the performance we want without the cost that it incurs? And that comes through with efficiency. So, and when we are talking about efficiency, we are talking about computational efficiency, we are talking about storage efficiency, and we are talking about communications efficiency. So focusing on computational storage and communications efficiency holistically would reduce the resource requirements that your application needs for processing certain workloads. And because of that, your if you need to consume more workload, you don't need to scale. And if you do need to scale, that would be for the increase in workload in a manner that generates more revenue for you, and that means that you have more margins over there. So that scaling would not be a cost for you, but it would be a revenue generating opportunity. So focusing on efficiency to achieve the performance should be the goal, and not just performance alone over here. Then the next one is independence. And when I talk about independence, I talk about building your application with the design and architecture principles that would allow you to change and evolve conveniently. And here we have quite a lot of techniques that come from domains like principles like the domain-driven design or evolutionary architectures. So essentially what we are talking about is keeping the domain logic decoupled from underlying technology and host platforms, building our application logic in a way that it can be moved from one technology, underlying technology, to another underlying technology as conveniently as possible. So this helps in incrementally building features. It also makes it easier to add or remove features, and that is essential to keeping the footprint on the cloud as minimum as possible. And a lower footprint, as we know, leads to lower resource usage, and lower resource usage again reduces cost. It also adds to agility. We are able to turn things around a lot more quickly. And finally, if you do need to rehost or replatform, then there isn't a need for a wholesale refactor, which would occur if you have your infrastructure and your technology leaking into your domain logic. And finally, cloud migrations are an opportunity for an organization to do what they have been thinking about doing for a very long time and have not had the opportunity to do that, which is to transform and to be able to do the business in a more efficient sort of a way. So it is an opportunity to have a conversation with your business, to start looking at a target operating model for the business, and start having conversations about how to achieve that target operating model from the operating model that your business and your organization is operating with at that moment in time. It is important to avoid the temptation of feature parity. A lot of our applications, and it's across the board, applications tend to have features that are unused, but the applications are still holding on to it, or the teams are still holding on to it because it is very hard to remove those features. And in a lot of cases, people don't even know whether those features are being used or not. And in fact, they are not being used, but people can't confirm that they are being used or not. And one of the big reasons that they can't do that is because there isn't a measurement of usage of those features or resources. So it is important to be able to measure how your features are being used, how's the functionality being used. And then based on that usage profile, start looking at how those features can be decommissioned. Now, the interesting thing about measuring the usage of an application is that you may not just see features that are not being used, but you may also see the emergence of new features, how the users are using that application, and what patterns are the calls coming, what's happening before other things, and in what frequency things are happening. Now, those patterns would reveal emergence of new features. And this is where re-architecting with that feature profile would give you a much better application, a much better user experience than what you have with an existing application. And definitely with if you try to achieve feature parity over here. So these principles just don't. I mean, these principles map the, uh, the the goals people are looking at, organizations are looking at to when they're thinking about migrating to cloud. So I have tried to put a small mapping of these principles against some of the goals that organizations are talking about when they're moving to cloud. So it is important to think about the principles and how they relate to the goals that you are trying to achieve, and then pursue your cloud migration with those principles in mind. So we have come to the end of the talk. So how do we succeed in a cloud migration? In my opinion, start earning as you spend. So the honeymoon period of a cloud migration is very short, and it is as short as somebody writing off the CapEx on your on-prem environment to signing the first check for your cloud migration, for your cloud bill. So it can be as short as that. And immediately after that, difficult conversations start happening about how this, where are these costs occurring? And those conversations don't go easy. They keep they keep increasing in their discomfort. So while the honeymoon period is short, the happily ever after is in our control. And the happily ever after is in my opinion, is achieved if we can show that what we are spending, we are earning, and we are earning more than what we are spending. So that's where the conversations about margins are very useful, and turning the conversations of costs around to margins would help you justify continuing to spend on your cloud migration exercise, especially when there is a re-architecture exercise involved. Recognizing what is not fit for the cloud is essential so that you focus on succeeding on the cloud. So there is no point in moving a high frequency trading application onto the cloud when you cannot guarantee that you'll be able to achieve real-time performance over there. So that better stay on-prem. But moving an application where you can, where real-time performance is not a requirement, but you can guarantee that that it's by scalability you'll be able to accommodate the volumes, is a very good fit for the cloud. Then being strategically flexible is a very useful trait. So being able to define your, being granular in your strategies and being able to adopt those strategies as you come across challenges is would help you succeed on the cloud. And then, as I mentioned, optimizing and automating everything would keep your costs down, would improve your efficiency, and would be able to again justify being on the cloud. And finally, having a transformative mindset while approaching cloud migration is very useful. You will be able to please your customers, and you'll be able to please your senior leadership. It'll be a difficult conversation to start with, but it would be a rewarding outcome. So with that, thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to have any questions anybody has. Hi, I can see one question. Could you comment on targeting Kubernetes native over cloud native? Can you go in more detail about apps that have been repatriated? Okay, I'll come to the question about apps being repatriated in just 1 minute before I would talk, before I would answer Chris's question. So Kubernetes native over cloud native. Now, if you go Kubernetes native, going to Kubernetes native is perceived as an advantage because Kubernetes tends to isolate you from a specific cloud vendor. So, I mean, that was the theory. So the theory was that if you go Kubernetes native, then as long as you're Kubernetes native, you can move from on-prem to AWS to Azure to Google and so on and so forth. Now, the challenge over here is that in recent times, people have found that that's not essentially the case, especially if you are using Kubernetes ports on various cloud platforms. So if you're using Kubernetes that is being offered by AWS, you may find that that's not entirely compatible with Kubernetes that is there on Azure or on Google. So unless you take a bare metal EC2 or you take bare metal EC2 instances and put your own Kubernetes on top of it, and then put your application on top of it, you don't have that independence in moving from one cloud platform to one cloud vendor to another cloud vendor. So the experience has been that it's not that seamless. Now, being cloud native is like essentially using the services that that cloud vendor is giving you. Now, you can be a bit more defensive over here and build that layers of abstraction within your application yourself, just to ensure that you are not tightly coupled to, for example, AWS, so that when you have to move to Azure, you just have to change those interfaces. But then there is that development effort required from moving from one cloud vendor to another cloud vendor. So these are some of the pros and cons that you have to keep into consideration when you're talking about Kubernetes versus cloud, and which Kubernetes, because there are different ports of Kubernetes available. So if you just take pure Kubernetes, or let's say just OpenShift, put it on bare metal, fine, that you are in control. But then you have to do a lot of work over there. Coming to the, have I answered your question, Chris? You can always ask it again. Nicholas, your question, more details about apps that have been repatriated? Yes, so it's an interesting mix of apps over here. So one type of apps are, again, as I said, had tight performance constraints, more kind of like real-time requirements, and cloud wasn't able to guarantee that kind of performance, so they found that challenging. Second types of applications have been where You have migrated processing, but not the data. So, and data could not be migrated because of regulatory concerns. So what you were having was a huge amount of back and forth between the applications and repositories of data. You can say that that was a bad bad choice of applications. They shouldn't have been they shouldn't have been moved onto cloud without moving their data onto the cloud at the same time. You would have highly transactional applications with huge transaction volumes, while the cloud may be giving you the elasticity that you want, but that would be happening with quite significant cost repercussions. But if those transaction volumes are not generating the revenue that is required, then those costs can become prohibitive and would require those applications to be repatriated. At the end of the day, every business needs margins to support themselves. And if you can't generate those margins, then it's simpler to spend a few £1,000s on on-prem infrastructure and spend that amount of money once, rather than having to cut monthly checks out. And so those are some of the examples that I've come across. An example of taking a margin-based approach. Okay, so I haven't come across one specifically, but I have used the margin argument myself a few times, and that argument tends to settle conversations. So, and in my case, I have been. In my case, what I've done is that I've started asking questions about, so what revenues we have been generating. So when people have been asking about cost, I've been asking about what revenues we have been generating. Are we able to pay for ourselves or not? And those conversations have helped settle the arguments. And when I've been able to ask for more resources on the cloud, and for a specific business functionality, I have taken the business leaders in the organization into confidence and have asked them for what kind of revenue projections they are looking at if we implement that functionality. And then those conversations, the tone of those conversations is very different as compared to if I just go and ask for more resources on the cloud, or I just go ahead and take more resources on the cloud, and then in the next billing cycle, I have to go and justify those. So if I preempt that, or when I have preempted that, and I have gone to the business development in the company and have spoken to them about revenue projections versus cost, those conversations have been a lot simpler. And a lot more comfortable conversations, as opposed to justifying costs later on. Neil, for lift and shift approach, are there particular sub-strategies you're aware of? Or can you talk about pros and cons? For example, interconnected apps with remote networking API dependencies is often an issue. Christmas tree lights. One possible solution is a network-based approach connecting cloud and on-prem. Any experience and views on that approach? Okay, so for lift and shift approach, one very interesting example where I successfully was able to have a conversation about lift and shift approach in an organization where they were very keen on re-architecting every application was, again, it started with a margin-based approach. So talking about they were already going through a migration of a similar application, a painful migration of a similar application through re-architecture, and that was taking quite a substantial amount of time. And cost was a huge conversation over there. So when the time came to discuss the second application, the conversation, I approached the conversation in a different way, and which was, if we lift and shift, we are able to start generating the revenue as quickly as we have ported the application onto the cloud. And the second thing that we could do is, because when we saw the the servers that the application was running on-prem, they were huge servers. Clearly, it was they were provisioned with they were excessively provisioned. So we could do another cost saving by right sizing the servers after lifting and shifting. So that would reduce the cost a little bit. The application would start generating the revenues as soon as it was ported, and then we could start incrementally strangulating that application to the platform that was being built, for the cloud native platform that was being built. So like moving the identity part of the application, so like the identity and access management, to the cloud native identity and access management, and similarly, slowly and gradually, functional elements also onto the cloud native platform. So so those were the ways I proposed that migration, and it was accepted that we would go with that route. The challenge with like remote networking and API dependencies, yeah, there is a challenge over there. What we tend to normally do is that we, the way we did in that particular organization, was to treat on-prem or external APIs as literally started having a conversation on SLAs. So if there are on-prem APIs or on-prem data that we needed to use, we had SLA conversations with the in-house infrastructure team, and drafted those SLAs and ensured that those SLAs are met while the on-cloud part of the application is executing. So it was having that conversation with the on-prem infrastructure team and getting them to agree on SLAs, and then having that confidence that those SLAs are going to be met, allowed us to traverse that complexity. There is another question. Sorry, I need to scroll down. How have you handled security and data privacy concerns on the cloud? So this is a very interesting question. So most cloud vendors are saying that it's a shared security model, and in the shared security model, they say is, and if you look into the fine print of the shared security model, what they tend to say is that they would guarantee the security of their infrastructure. Now, everything that sits on top of their infrastructure, we have to be responsible for the security. So that's the definition of a shared security model. So basically, fundamentally, everything that I put on cloud, I'm responsible for that. They are saying that they will make sure that the infrastructure has the latest ports from like the operating systems, the platform would have the latest security patches applied to it. But beyond that, it's my responsibility to ensure that the application is secure, and we have all the regulations. We are satisfying all the data privacy regulations over there. So it is fundamentally just being aware of security best practices, scheduling, using first of all, using all the automated tools that would give you some guidance on your security. So like you have tools and apps that would give you, that would tell you as part of your testing that that there are security vulnerabilities in your code, or security vulnerabilities in your third-party libraries. Just making sure that you are on top of that. Scheduling pen tests at a right frequency, and then making sure that all the pen test recommendations are actively remediated. Now, as far as the data privacy concerns are concerned, I mean, again, it's applying the best practices. I would not differentiate between cloud and on-prem. I mean, if somebody can break onto cloud, they can break onto on-prem as well. And if you don't have your data privacy best practices in place, you are vulnerable in either way. So it's just making sure that your data is properly anonymized, segregated, and has the right privileged access to it. So it's fundamentally, I don't think that there is any difference over there. It should be just as secure. In fact, I find that it's more secure on the cloud because you tend to have all the latest security patches. You all have all the latest encryption patches and applied to the front ends of the cloud at the API level. I think if there are no more questions, I think I can probably stop recording and end the meeting. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And I'm happy to take questions. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and happy to share ideas and have a conversation with you guys over there. Thank you very much. Bye.